All right, in today's video, let's discuss UFC 300, right? I know we still got a little while till this hits, but fights are being announced all the way up to UFC 299. That's the headliners at least. And I'm just going to go over in this video why UFC 300 is shaping up to be absolutely problematic. And I'm curious to see what the UFC does. They're the best promotion in the world for a reason. They're good at putting together fights. They're good at figuring these things out. The reason I thought I'd make this video is because John Kavanaugh is on the record saying that Conor McGregor is probably not going to be fighting until the summer of 2024. Now, is this actually true? Are they playing a little bit of poker to try to, play with us a little bit and then make the announcement that much more exciting that he is going to end up headlining UFC 300 versus Chandler? I don't know. But in this video, let's act as if Conor McGregor's not available, because there's just a lot of problems that I'm seeing for this event, and I think that the UFC is going to be scrambling here. And let's get into why. Okay, so obviously for this event, it's a historic event. You need top tier matchups. The card's got to be decked out, right? You would think that it would be headlined by some sort of title fight, right? Which, again, the problem with McGregor headlining is it wouldn't be a title fight. So then do you put the title fights under it, right? Because the new era of UFC, we don't do that. The UFC doesn't do that. It's title fights are at the top of the card. Despite who's on the card, you always have the title fights are, the main and co-main event. If there's title fights on there, they're not, maybe they would, but back in the day they did Nate and Conor, and then you could put a title fight below. But now the way the UFC's been operating, that doesn't seem too likely, right? So I'm just going to give my thoughts on matchups that I think we could see if that is Conor McGregor and Chandler aren't going to headline, which is, first, we have to recognize Jon Jones is not going to be ready in time for UFC 300. And in my opinion, the best option to headline UFC 300 would have been Jon Bones Jones versus Stipe Miocic for the heavyweight strap. I think that would have been an iconic landmark event, UFC 300. It's the third, 100 event, so it's a big deal. It would have been an OG and Jon Jones, an OG and Stipe. Guys have been around for a while, best of the best, heavyweight clash. Sounds perfect to me, but it can't happen. Jon Jones is hurt. He's on an 8-month timeline. He's still got a long way to go for, before we can see him again. And Stipe's fighting Jon. Dana made that very clear. That's the next matchup. So what do they do? I don't know, because Tom Aspinall just won the interim belt, but theoretically, whoever wins the interim belt, you're not fighting until you're actually fighting the actual champion, right? That interim belt is you punching your ticket to earning your title shot next. You normally don't win the interim belt and then defend the interim belt, or fight someone that is a ranked contender, but then you're the interim champ. That doesn't happen. So people are throwing out Tom Aspinall, and DC, I think, said something about that. You might have to fact check me on that, but I'm pretty sure DC said one of the heavyweights, whoever wins the interim belt. Well, how is that going to happen? Right? I don't see how that makes any sense and how that lines up. So it's left me with two title fight options that I think are the most likely if, again, this is all pending Conor McGregor. And even if Conor McGregor fights, we need more beef at the top of the main card. Alex Pineda versus Jamal Hill for the light heavyweight championship, and Max Holloway going up to 155 to face Justin Gaethje for the BMF belt. Those are my two options as headliners / the top two fights / title fights that we could really throw in there where people are like, I'm in, I want to see it. Now, I will be honest with you. Are people really excited to see Alex Pineda versus Jamal Hill? I mean, I think it's exciting because people really like Pineda now, and he's got this character going, the stoic, and he's knocking people out. We all know about Pineda at this point, right? So, he's got a little bit of the backstory going. Jamal Hill's kind of building it up, talking his game, saying, he doesn't have anything on me, I can beat him, and not on my level, all that stuff. Jamal Hill beat Glover. It just kind of adds to the list for Alex Pineda to avenge Glover and all these different things. But is that really a headliner for UFC 300? Maybe. I don't know. I'm just throwing it out there. That's one of the options for title fights. Number two, Justin Gaethje, Max Holloway. Who doesn't want to see that? Right? I mean, we're all MMA fans here. Justin Gaethje, Max Holloway, that's an incredible fight. That's a guaranteed war back and forth, just dog fight. Guys are, I mean, it's crazy. I still think that that's a tough matchup for Holloway because we've seen Holloway when he goes up to 55, the power difference between him and some of these other guys, right? We saw how him and Poirier went. Again, Holloway a little bit older now, Gaethje a little bit older now. I don't know. It's an interesting fight. It's a fun fight. And then to throw onto the card at the top of the lineup would be one Nathan Diaz versus Dustin the Diamond Poirier, which I think is a tremendous matchup. I think that matchup gets made regardless and is somewhere on the main card of UFC 300, right? These guys have been in the UFC since they were in the 100s, right? I mean, Nathan's been around for years in the UFC. So has Dustin. They've both cut their teeth in the organization. They're both big names. I would say Nathan's the bigger name at this point. It's just it's kind of a star-studded matchup. I think it's a super fun fight. That would be a war. That would be a back-and-forth dogfight. I think that Nate would ask for that to be 5 rounds, so that would be a championship caliber fight. I think whoever wins could earn some sort of welterweight title shot or fight for the BMF belt next, or I don't know. They'd probably put something on the line to up the stakes of that matchup. But the point is, it's tough to look at these matchups because theoretically, for UFC 300, if it's not McGregor headlining, well, what would you go to immediately, right? I mean, not that we all would really want to see Adesanya headline it, but what I'm thinking in the UFC's brain, who are their cash cows and who they're pushing to headline? And that has been Israel Adesanya for the past few years. He's not the champ. He doesn't have the belt. I don't think that his next fight will be a title fight. How could it be? He lost to Sean Strickland. He lost the belt to Pineda, got his rematch. We got it. Loses to Strickland. He says he wants to take time off. So that's a guy that they would look at as a headliner, right? That would make sense. Sean O'Malley fighting at, I believe it's UFC 299 against Chito Vera. So that's not an option. I think to add some beef to the card, and another possible headlining option would be in January, we have Sean Strickland versus Dracus du Plessis. The winner of that taking on Khamzat Chimaev in either the main, co-main, something like that for the middleweight title. I see that option being incredibly likely. A lot of eyeballs on Khamzat. They like the matchup, those matchups for Khamzat, I'm sure. So I don't know. Maybe they add Khamzat and Costa to the card. I don't know. There's so much craziness at the timeline of this that I think that really anything's possible in terms of headliners. Like, I've also went back and forth contemplating, like, if Leon Edwards beats Colby Covington, which I think he will, does Leon Edwards go up and, because he's talking about wanting to fight for the middleweight belt, does that happen? Like him going up in weight? I don't really think so, right? I mean, I don't think that would headline UFC 300, but is it possible that maybe Leon fights someone at 170 for the belt to headline? I don't know. But it's a problem. The UFC has a problem, and I'm sure they'll figure it out. They're the best in the world for a reason, but it's just the title fights that they've announced over the next several months leading up to this event. It's just, you're gambling because, you have Volkanovski in a matchup, I believe, with Ilia Topuria. The timeline of a go-to for me, what would make sense as a headliner could be Islam Makhachev and Charles Oliveira, but normally around that time of year, it's hard for Islam and those guys. That's normally where they take their time off. And so it's just, what do we do here? And I think the UFC is in a real standstill moment. Maybe they are playing kind of poker, cat and mouse, trying to, because the Schmo reported that, they're looking to target Chandler McGregor for UFC 300. What happens? I don't know. But it's an issue because the way that the title fights are lining up, who has belts, who doesn't, I don't know what headlines. Another big fight could be Pineda versus Adesanya, but you can't do that because Adesanya hasn't fought at 205. He lost to Jan Blachowicz for the belt. What warrants a title shot for him at UFC 205? Dana White said Adesanya needs to win a fight at 205, then he can earn a title shot at that weight class. So what happens here? I don't know. It's all over the place in my opinion. I think that this is going to be a little bit of a disaster. What do you all think? Comment below. What do you guys think are the headliners are going to be, right? I've seen what some of these guys are putting out there, analysts and things, and I just don't think that they're recognizing the issues, the timing of things, when guys are fighting, and then to be like, oh, well, a guy fought in February, well, he can turn around and fight in April. It's like, we don't know that. Is he going to be healthy? Are there going to be injuries? Is something going to happen? In that matchup where maybe you break a foot or, tear something. I don't know. Like, I don't wish injury upon. I'm just saying, right? You can't bank on, we're going to have a guy fight in March and then have him fight in April. He'll come out clean as a whistle. Like, it's fighting. Like, anything can happen. This is really interesting. I'm curious to see what they do here. I really do think that they're going to somehow put McGregor versus Chandler there. It's just hard for me to believe that headlining UFC 300, it's not some guy that's been in the UFC for an extended period of time that is a gigantic name, right? Like a John Jones, Conor McGregor, like something like that. And it just seems like that would be the go-to matchup, the real option here. But in terms of belts and title fights, the timeline here, UFC doesn't have a ton of options. But again, they're very good at what they do. And I'm curious to see what they do. But let me know what you all think down in the comments. What matchups would you like to see at UFC 300? How do you think that they're going to deck this card out? I think it's going to be loaded. Another matchup I think that they're going to throw in there is Kamaru Usman versus Robert Whittaker at 185 pounds. I know that Whittaker brought up that he would like that fight. I think that that's a fun matchup. We could see Costa Chimaev on that. We could see just so many different fights. Matchmaking is no problem, right? As long as they're non-title fights. The problem is the headliners is what I'm talking about in this, right? They could throw together a stacked card pretty easily. But in terms of that main event, co-main event, belts on the line type of thing, that's a little bit of a problem for me. However, I do think that you can do Max Holloway, Justin Gaethje for the BMF belt in that realm there, and then have Nathan Diaz versus Dustin Poirier, and then the winner of that would face Holloway or Gaethje for the BMF belt. What do you all think? Subscribe, like. I appreciate you all. See you in the next one.